Bill Carlson's life story. We hope you enjoy today's story. I am a rural boy. My name is Bill Carlson. I have a specialist diploma in animal husbandry, and all I have ever wanted is to have my own farm supply store and raise a family. After college, I married my high school sweetheart, Jenny. We grew up together, and she was the only girl I ever imagined myself living with. She was a pretty brunette, and she had a beautiful body, even after giving birth to 2 boys. I was proud that she was my wife, and I was willing to do anything for her. However, Jenny had one problem. She envied people who led a glamorous life. She read society columns in newspapers and subscribed to all the magazines that talked about beautiful people. When she went to the dentist, she read car magazines, and she was familiar with all the fashionable cars. She knew all the designers and was familiar with their clothing lines. She wanted to be someone more in the world, and I couldn't provide that for her. I got a job in Omaha at a trendy farm supply store that catered to yuppies. This allowed us to be closer to the big city, and I could still pursue my favorite business. I liked my job, and I was good at it. I could relate to customers on a personal level, and the company rewarded my efforts by giving me a flexible schedule. Jenny preferred living in the city rather than out in the country, and for a while, she was happy. When she decided to go to work, we had to put the kids in daycare, but they seemed okay with it. Jenny worked at a company that manufactured medical equipment called Gilbert Medical. They produced syringes and other medical supplies. It was an office job, and she seemed happy because it allowed her to dress up and interact with people who weren't farmers. She worked a lot and seemed to lose interest in our family life. As a result, I took care of the boys most of the time. I took them to daycare and picked them up after work. I fed them and, as usual, prepared dinner. I even did the cooking, and in the end, I did most of the housework. She did the laundry, making sure all her clothes were perfectly pressed. We saved money every month so that eventually I could open my own farm supply store. Now it turned out that even with her job, we couldn't save anything anymore. Her daily expenses were not much, but most of it went to trips to beauty salons, manicure parlors, and expensive clothing stores. It was hard for me to understand how we could have 2 jobs and save less money. She refused to discuss it and became very defensive and upset whenever I brought it up. After a while, I stopped even mentioning it. However, I opened another savings account which I could manage separately. She started working overtime. She began receiving calls late at night. She became less attentive in bed. She wanted a newer, better car. She even talked about getting breast implants. I had no doubts that my wife was having an affair. Maybe I'm just a simple country boy, but I'm not naive. At that point, I didn't even want to salvage the marriage. I just wanted to sort things out and move on before it was too late. It was hard to pinpoint anything because I didn't interact with the people she worked with, but I was almost certain that if anything was happening, it was with someone from work. I worked with a couple of good guys. They weren't very educated, but they worked hard. My work made me their supervisor, but I never played boss. It seemed like the work always got done without needing to boss them around. Everyone knew what was needed, and we all worked together. The guys appreciated it, and it contributed to good relations. Roy and Freddie were supposed to become valuable allies in my plan. I noticed that around Jenny, she always wore fashionable lingerie and her best outfits. It seemed like she needed more time to get ready for work. I decided it was the right time to act. I told the guys what was happening, and they agreed to take care of my deliveries and appointments for the day. I parked near the parking lot of Gilbert Medical Equipment Factory. It gave me a good opportunity to stake out the technical side. Around 11 o'clock, Jenny came out and got into her car. It wasn't hard to follow her, and after a few minutes, she parked at the hotel parking lot. She parked in the West End, far from the office. A few minutes later, a guy in a red Corvette pulled up and parked at the East End. I didn't recognize the car, but when he got out, Jenny got out of hers. They walked to a room on the 2nd floor, room 117, and then went inside. He already had the key. My heart sank, and I felt a slight nausea in my stomach. Everything I had done confirmed my suspicions. I had no idea what to do next. I decided to leave and return to work. I wouldn't rush to plan my next move. Before pulling out of the parking lot, I got out of the car and clipped 2 wires of her valve with my wire cutters, one from the front and one from the back. I was a little shaken. I don't know why I didn't make a few more punctures in him. The rest of the day passed extremely slowly. I picked up the kids after work, drove home, and prepared dinner. When she came in, I asked how her day went, and she said everything was fine, except that she got a flat tire. One of the guys at work changed it for her. Nothing more was said about it. The next day, after dropping off the boys at daycare, I headed to the factory. It didn't take me long to find the fancy Corvette after I dropped off the boys at daycare. Luckily, the guy had a reserved parking spot with a sign. I noted down Ken Beauchamp, distribution manager. Roy's wife worked in HR at Gilbert Medical. By that evening, I knew everything there was to know about the good old Ken. The most important thing was that he was already married. He had been given a warning for sexual propositions to one of his colleagues, and he had some financial issues with his accounts. I got his address, phone number, cell phone number, and even his SSN, but I didn't know what to do with this information. He had been married for 8 years, and his wife's name was Amy. We worked well, and Roy, Freddie, and I found time to have a beer each before I had to pick up the kids. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was sure things would work out soon. I tried to stay calm and logical in this situation, but every day I was becoming more insane. From time to time, I caught myself silently crying. It hurt, and I felt like I couldn't fix myself. Living with Jenny was becoming increasingly difficult for me. I just wanted it to end. The next day, I got lucky again when I remembered that one of my best clients, Marge Gilbert, was the wife of the president of the medical company, Gilbert Medical. I had never met him, but Marge and I got along great. I was particularly friendly with Marge, trying to understand if I could use our relationship to my advantage when Marge's daughter Cindy came by. Cindy was studying in her final year of veterinary school. Marge went inside to work, and Cindy and I talked for about an hour. I enjoyed spending time with her, and after I left, I felt a little guilty, but it quickly passed. During the weekend, I spent some time in the garage, doing some welding. I took a small piece of flat steel and attached 4 sharp tips to it. I made the tips out of dowels to ensure they were really solid and not flimsy. The plate was about 15 by 15 centimeters, and this was supposed to be my first step towards getting revenge for the harassment. I saw Marge again on Tuesday. I was a bit distracted while processing the order, and I just wasn't myself. It caught her attention. "Bill, what's wrong today? Why are you so gloomy?" "I have some personal problems, Marge. I'm sorry, I'm not good company today. Let's have some coffee and you'll tell me about it." We entered the house and sat in the kitchen. It resembled an interior of a restaurant. Everything was made of non-rusting steel and granite. It looked like a magazine. I thought to myself that Jenny would like it. Marge placed the coffee on the table, leaned forward, and asked, "Well, what can you do to help me, Marge?" "Well, I don't know until you explain the problem to me." I really didn't want to talk to her about it, but eventually decided that maybe it could help. My wife, Jenny, works at Gilbert Medical, and I think she's being coerced into having sex with one of her bosses, but I can't prove anything. Why do you think this is happening? Mainly little things, but last week I caught them both together at a hotel. My wife doesn't know I know, and I don't know how to bring it up. I don't know if it's something she feels obligated to do or if it's something she wants to do. Our family life has deteriorated to the point where she seems to not care about the kids or me. It seems like she's keeping it a secret, and that's what really worries me. Who's this guy? I think his name is Ken Beauchamp. I don't know if Jenny works for him or if they work in different parts of the factory. I've never met him. Do you want me to see if I can help? I paused for a moment and lowered my head. If you think something can be done quietly, I'd be willing to try, but I don't want to make a fuss. Okay, let me handle this. We'll meet next Thursday with oatmeal delivery. I thanked her, and as I got up to leave, I asked, "Where's Cindy?" "She went back to school. She'll be home this weekend. Why don't you bring the boys over so she can meet them?" Wow, it turned out much better than I expected. I'm sure Jenny won't have a problem letting me take the boys for a walk. These could be good weekends. The next morning, it was pouring rain. Jenny dressed up again for her special day, and I didn't say anything as I watched. After dropping the kids off at the daycare, I headed to work. The guys were ready to cover for me in the morning shift. Roy was going to use my truck, do my deliveries, and log them in the journal. I would initialize all the entries after I returned to work. Freddie brought his cousin's van to work, and I loaded the jack into it. We attached my steel plate to the jack's lift. We loaded up all the trucks, and after they left for their deliveries, I headed to the hotel. Just in time, Jenny pulled up and parked in the same spot as before. Ken lagged behind her for a few moments and also parked in the same spot as before. After they entered the room, I gave them about 10 minutes to settle in. I removed the jack from the back of the van in the pouring rain and rolled it over to Ken's car. I slid the jack under the engine block and lifted it. It was only a few seconds before I heard a thunk as the nails punctured the oil pan. I tossed it to the ground and climbed into the back seat of the Corvette. A few seconds later, I heard the same thunks in the fuel tank. Oil and gasoline were leaking out. I brought the jack back to the van. All of this took less than a minute. I went down to Jenny's car and again cut 2 valves with my bolt cutters. By then, I was ready to leave. I drove past Ken's car, flicked a lit cigarette out the window, and drove off. In the rearview mirror, I saw flames erupt, and a few seconds later, I heard an explosion as I pulled out of the parking lot. I felt better. Jenny came home from work a little late. She didn't eat dinner and went straight to bed. I played with the boys for a while, bathed them, and put them to bed. That night, I slept on the couch. Jenny stayed in bed the next morning as I got the boys ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left. She never got up. She didn't say anything. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Around 9 a.m., after we loaded all the trucks, I was visited by Police Lieutenant John Fritz. He was a rather friendly guy. "Tell me about your work schedule yesterday," he said. "Just the usual deliveries, nothing special." "Why are you asking?" I replied. "Can you account for your whereabouts around noon?" I went into the office and grabbed the delivery logs from the previous day. I placed them in front of him. Each stop listed the location, delivered goods, unloading time, and my initials. He smiled and chuckled slightly. "This is quite a good log. Do you guys do this every day?" "Would you like to see the logs for the past month?" I offered. He shook his head negatively and smiled again. I wasn't sure if I should feel good or bad. "Don't you want to tell me what's going on?" I asked. It seemed like he didn't want to delve into details, but eventually he opened up. "Yesterday, a car was damaged at the hotel in East Omaha, and we're trying to figure out if anyone knew anything about it." "What does this have to do with me?" "Well, the other car parked next to the damaged one had 2 valve stems cut. It belonged to your wife. We were curious if it was a coincidence or not. First of all, I don't know why my wife's car was at the hotel parking lot. And secondly, what does it have to do with the damaged car?" The damaged car belonged to an employee she worked with. Apparently, they had a lunch meeting with the company's clients at the hotel, and everything happened while they were having lunch. "Did you talk to the people they had lunch with?" "No, they couldn't remember their names." "Do you want to be candid with me, or are we going to play games all morning?" He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You know a guy named Ken Bosham? I've never met this person, and that's the honest truth." "I believe you." He smiled again. "I don't like getting involved in family disputes and hope I won't have to come back to you again. Here's my card. Give me a call if anything else happens." "Okay?" He shook my hand. "I'm sorry I had to bring this to your attention. If there's anything I can help with, let me know." "Okay?" As he left, I said, "Thank you, but you haven't really told me anything. Piece it all together." After work, when the kids and I returned home, Jenny's car was parked in the driveway. She was casually dressed and had prepared dinner. She said she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. She still hadn't said anything about what happened the day before, so I didn't bring it up. She went to bed early, and I took care of the kids again and slept on the couch. The next day, she was up and getting ready for work when I left with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I went to the doctor's office and asked for a venereal disease checkup. Work was typical for a Friday. When I returned home, Jenny was there again. After dinner, I told her I was taking the boys to spend the next day at one of my clients' farms. I asked her if she wanted to come along, fully expecting her to find a reason to decline. She said she needed to do some shopping, and I didn't insist. Whether it was shopping or a date, it didn't matter to me. The results were the same. Saturday with Cindy and the boys at the Gilbert's ranch went splendidly. We had a blast the entire day. Marge prepared an excellent lunch for everyone, and I didn't want it to end. Cindy adored the boys, and it seemed they liked her a lot too. Mr. Gilbert wasn't there, so I never got to meet him. Marge didn't mention anything about our previous conversation at all, and Cindy seemed unaware of it. I dreaded going back home, but eventually we had to. Jenny didn't even ask how our day went. She simply didn't care. The boys tried to tell her a few times about everything they did, but she ignored them. Eventually, they gave up trying. She asked why I no longer slept in the bed, and I explained that due to work issues, I tossed and turned a lot and didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last thing she said about it. The following week went by completely normal. On her special day, I noticed she didn't make any special preparations, so I assumed our date for that day was canceled. It suited me fine because I had a lot of work to catch up on. I stopped by the divorce lawyer's office I'd heard about, and she gave me some handouts and brochures with a lot of information. She had a few filled out forms that looked intriguing. Everything returned to normal by the following Wednesday. She started with a morning shower and then carefully styled her hair. She wore new black, sexy lingerie and new perfume. It even looked like new shoes. I was careful not to let her catch me looking, and I dashed out with the boys. I was sure it was a date day. After dropping off the boys, I swung by the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxer was parked in his spot. I noted the car's license plate number and hurried back to work. The guys were just as excited about the new development as I was. We rushed through all the morning deliveries and forged the journals again. I'm sure John Fritz saw through this trick, but we did it anyway. We had a free and extended lunch. Roy continued with deliveries. Freddie went to the pool supply store and bought 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid. I went to have lunch with John Fritz. John looked at me strangely when I entered his office with sandwiches with pork, fries, and a couple of bottles of Coca-Cola. I greeted him and sat across from him. He realized something was up and grinned from ear to ear. I said that I thought we could have lunch together, and he could fill me in on the car damage incident. I needed to figure out how to occupy him for an hour or two. Lunch promised to be long. While I was trying to be polite, Freddie was in the hotel parking lot. He found the Boxer and carefully doused the trunk, fenders, and hood with acid. He cut open the convertible top and poured acid on the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard also got a dose of acid. For added conviction, he placed a box of mothballs in the gas tank. Gasoline would not react well with the engine if someone were to start it. The remaining acid spilled onto the top part of the tires. Before leaving, he cut the valve stems on Jenny's car again. Everything was done within 15 minutes. The only downside was that I didn't know how long they would both stay in the room. John and I chatted for a long time about trivial matters until he finally asked, "What the hell are you up to?" Just wanted to make sure I had a good alibi in case something happens to Ken Bosham's car today. What's so special about today? The pulled pork sandwich was special. I pulled out my cell phone and called the daycare. "Hi, Carol. This is Bill Carlson. I'll be busy at work this afternoon and was hoping you could call Jenny and ask her to come pick up the boys." "Thanks. I really appreciate it. You can reach her by phone. You might need to ask for her by name. Try to call as soon as possible to make sure you catch her." "All right, thanks again." John leaned back in his chair and chuckled. God, those pork sandwiches were delicious. For a while, everyone was silent, and finally, John said, "Do you think I should call Mr. Bosham and ask about his car? Why do you want to do that? Do you happen to know where I could reach him?" I gave him his cell phone number and room number 117 at the hotel. "Take your pick." John activated the speakerphone and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Bosham answered, breathing heavily. "Hello, who's this?" "Mr. Bosham, this is Detective Fritz. I'm calling to let you know that we still have no leads on who damaged your car." Why are you calling here? How did you get this number? I'm a police officer, Mr. Bosham. Have you already bought a new car? Yes, I have. Why do you ask? Just wanted to make sure we didn't have a repeat of the last incident. Is the car with you now? Yes, it's in the parking lot. Is everything all right? Let me check. We could hear Ken muttering in the background as he surveyed the parking lot through the window. There were a few piercing screams and a quiet groan. He returned to the phone. Something's not right. I need to get dressed and go check. I'll call you back right away. All right, Mr. Bosham, why aren't you dressed right now? None of your business. I need to go. They both hung up. John looked at me and smiled. Happy? Of course. Listen, I need to get back to work. If you have any questions, give me a call, all right? Maybe we'll have lunch again next week. Hope not. This should be over soon, before someone gets hurt. I returned to work. Roy got the logs squared away, and Freddie hid the acid bottles where no one would find them. Tonight promises to be interesting at home. Jenny picked up the boys, but didn't say anything and went to bed early again. John came to see me the next day. He explained all the damage done to the car and how Ken's insurance wasn't paid out after the Corvette incident. The car was completely repaired. He lost over $60,000. Ken insisted I had something to do with it, even after John told him I was with him when it happened. Of course, John knew I was involved, but he couldn't prove anything, and I don't think he wanted to. I don't know how Jenny fixed the tires. I never asked, and no one ever volunteered. Since Jenny never confessed to the whole situation, I decided it was time to put an end to it all. My test results came back clean. I filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to start the divorce proceedings. I planned to go to the Gilberts' ranch this weekend with the boys, in case Cindy would be there. If not, we'd spend the day with Marge. The only downside was that I still had no evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend went well. Cindy was there, the kids were thrilled, and we all had a great time again. We were like a family. I really missed this, and so did the boys. Cindy still didn't know what was going on, but at least she didn't ask. Before I left, Marge winked and said everything would be okay. I was offered a new position about 150 kilometers away from here. It was for more money, a better job, and the opportunity to buy into the business in a few years. It was perfect. The only downside was that we wouldn't be close to Cindy. Next Wednesday, Jenny dressed up again. I didn't know which car her boyfriend used, but she was definitely getting ready for another visit with him. I assumed they were still meeting at the same place. I was planning to do something, but I didn't actually plan it in advance. While the boys and I were trying to come up with something to do, Marge Gilbert pulled up. She gestured for me to come over and told me to get in the car. She didn't say anything, just drove to the factory. She parked at the back, and we entered through a separate entrance directly into Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge introduced us, and his secretary brought us all coffee. We chatted about trivial matters for a while, and finally I said, "You brought me here for a reason, right?" Mr. Gilbert chuckled. "It's time to wrap up this show." Marge informed me of what's going on, and I conducted a small internal investigation. Once everything is ready, we'll begin. By the end of the day, you should have all the information you need. If I do anything that puts you in an awkward position, Bill, I apologize in advance. It's not my intention to cause you pain. We chatted a bit more to pass the time, and Marge noticed how I smiled when the conversation turned to Cindy. I tried not to show it, but I wasn't very good at hiding it. The phone rang and everyone perked up their ears. "What's happening?" "All right, thanks for the call. Do you know what to do now, right?" Mr. Gilbert smiled and said, "Okay, everything's in place. We can begin. Ken and your wife are in their usual hotel room. Ken arrived there in the company's Benz. That goes against company policy, so they're bringing him back to the factory right now. I'm sorry to say this, but it seems like your wife also has a couple of flat tires. It appears to be some kind of tradition." He activated the speakerphone and dialed the number. "Ken, this is Mr. Gilbert. Sorry to bother you, but I need to discuss a very important matter with you." Ken stuttered slightly. "Yes, okay, no problem. How did you get this number?" "Ken, that's not important, but what is important is that the legal department has been notified about a possible situation of sexual harassment." I need to get the right answers here, Ken, so listen carefully. Is there a female employee of the company with you right now? There was a pause and some background conversation that we couldn't make out. Yes, sir. Ken, is she there of her own free will or because of any coercion or threats from your side? No, sir, absolutely not. There was no coercion whatsoever. She's here of her own free will. I didn't coerce her into anything. So, the sex is consensual on both sides? Yes, sir. Absolutely. It's all consensual. That's great, Ken. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear to clear up this whole mess. I really appreciate your honesty in this delicate matter. We'll prepare a statement confirming this, and everything will be ready. Now, I also need to clarify this with the young lady. Please connect her, please. Again, there was a flurry of background noise that we couldn't make out. Finally, Jenny appeared on the line. Sir, how can I help you? Jenny, did Mr. Beauchamp coerce you or threaten you in any way to go there with him? No, sir. He didn't threaten me in any way. It's good to hear. So the sex was consensual, and you weren't intimidated in any way. Is that correct? Again, there was a pause and a lot of muffled conversations. Jenny appeared on the line again. Yes, sir. It was consensual. It's good to hear. When you and Ken return to the plant, we'll have statements ready for you to sign. Could you reconnect Ken, please? Sir, how did you know my name? Don't worry about that, Jenny. It doesn't matter. After Ken returned to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to return to the plant so they could sign papers in the legal department. He hung up and smiled. Marge, why don't you take Bill out for lunch and come back in a couple of hours? By then, the lawyers should be finished, and we can all get our lives back on track. We had a great lunch. I struggled not to cry, but I just couldn't thank her enough. Eventually, she got me to agree that we would never discuss this topic or what was done ever again. She also made me promise not to say anything to Cindy about it at all. That was a good sign. I told Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for me and the boys. After lunch, we returned to the plant, and I picked up notarized copies of Ken and Jenny's statements. They both swore that they had consensual sex outside of marriage. The lawyers assured me that this was enough for my attorney to proceed with the divorce. Ken and Jenny were both fired. Their personal belongings had been packed before they even arrived, and they were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge loaned me her car and said I could return it the next day. I delivered the documents to the lawyers. She made several copies of each for me. One set I intended to send to Ken's wife. I went to the bank and closed the accounts. I paid off all credit cards and canceled them. I called the gas, water, electric, and phone companies and arranged to have the utilities disconnected on Friday afternoon. I stopped by to see John Fritz and told him I had been a good boy. He laughed. I notified the landlord that I wouldn't be staying next month. I informed my workplace. They were happy for me, but unhappy about my departure. Freddie drove with me to the Gilberts' ranch in my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I was afraid to cross the threshold. Jenny's car wasn't in the driveway. When we entered, she was sitting on the couch, crying. It was the first time she had shown any emotions at all. There were 2 boxes of her personal belongings from work. I fed the boys and turned on the TV for them. I stood next to her, as if giving her the opportunity to speak if she wanted to. You should have done it. Isn't that right? You just had to ruin everything in my life? Why the hell couldn't you just mind your own business? You had no grounds to meddle in mine? I was stunned. She still looked at the whole situation as if it all revolved around her. She didn't care about the kids or me at all. She didn't even think about Ken's wife, Amy. Our family, our life, and our plans. None of it meant anything to her. All she cared about was what she was doing at the moment. Nothing else mattered. I felt relieved that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life with her. I didn't say anything. I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, when I was getting the boys ready for bed, she walked into the bedroom and closed the door. The next day, I took the boys to work with me. I just made sure there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could stick to the system I had set up. We went to a few stores and gathered moving boxes. I drove by the hotel. Jenny's car wasn't there, so I figured she must have fixed it already. Fixing the flat tires must have really strained her budget for purchases over the last month. Jenny wasn't home when we arrived. We only took clothes and toys. I left everything else there for Jenny to dispose of. Of course, she didn't know that all the utilities would be shut off the next day. Damn, I was a sneaky bastard. As we pulled out of the driveway, Jenny was parking. She just stood by her car and watched us drive down the street. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese's, and we spent the night at a motel. The next morning, I took the boys to daycare. I gave Carol some cookies and souvenirs for the party and told her that it was the boys' last day and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before I left, she pulled me aside. "What happened with your wife last week?" I didn't want to ask, but since you're leaving, I'm dying of curiosity. She was really upset when I called. She insisted on knowing where I got this number from, and when I told her you gave it to me, she started swearing like a sailor. She didn't say anything when she picked them up, but I could tell she was really angry. "I'm sorry, Carol. I sort of put you in a tough spot. Jenny was having an affair. She was at a hotel with her boyfriend, and I was hoping that if I persuaded you to call and interrupt their party, she would change her mind about everything. It didn't work. In the end, she just got mad at both of us. Today, I'm serving her divorce papers, and the boys and I are leaving for a new job right after I pick them up. It was a cheap move on my part, and I apologize for dragging you into this." I went to my divorce lawyer. She had everything ready. I was picking up the kids, and Jenny could have visitation rights whenever she wanted. It suited me because I didn't think they would interest her anyway. Everything else was divided evenly, but there wasn't much to discuss. There were no alimony payments, no child support, no cash settlements. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and other household items. I really didn't need them. She kept her car. I didn't want it because its tires were constantly deflating. All I needed to do was hand over the documents to Jenny. If she doesn't contest it, everything will be finalized in 3 months. A notarized copy of Ken and Jenny's statement was attached to the divorce papers. A small note in the margin, made by the lawyer, indicated that the statements would be kept confidential if all divorce terms were agreed upon. There were no questions. The car was parked in the driveway, so I was sure she was home. I sat in the driveway for a long time. I loved Jenny. She was the only girl I had ever been close to. I thought our relationship was normal, and I never even considered that I wasn't giving her what she craved. She never directly let me know, and I was too dense to pick up on all the hints. I let her down in many ways. What she did was deceitful on her part, but I felt partly responsible for my inattentiveness. I knocked on the door of my own house, and it felt strange. She opened the door for me. She looked tired and asked if I wanted something to drink. I handed her the papers. She didn't bother to open them, just looked at them and then back at me. I looked at her and asked, "Why?" I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a few seconds, she finally opened up. "He smelled like aftershave while you smelled like fertilizer. He wore Armani suits while you wore jeans. He ate lobsters and steaks while you ate ribs and burgers. He wore a London fog coat while you wore Carhartt. He drove a fancy car while you drove a truck. His nails were clean while yours were always dirty. He had a real job while you were still just a country boy. Is that enough for you? I could go on all day if you want. I hoped for a life that you couldn't give me. I'm sorry we got married, Bill. I married you for the wrong reasons. I should have known that you wouldn't or couldn't give me what I truly wanted. I saw you as a way to escape from my parents and didn't think far enough ahead. I sincerely regret that, but I can't change how I feel. I love my children, but I regret having them. I know it sounds terrible, but it seems I have no maternal instinct. I hoped that by finding someone who could fill the gaps in my dreams, I would feel fulfilled, but it only made me less satisfied with my current situation. I'm sorry I misled you. I'm sorry I was a bad mother to my children. I don't regret chasing my dreams and seeking something better. What about his wife? What about your husband? What about your children? What about your family? Her demeanor seemed to change instantly. My questions rattled her, and she no longer seemed remorseful for her actions. I don't give a damn about any of that. Now it's my turn. I want to live the life I've always dreamed of. A peasant husband and two snotty-nosed kids with dirty faces aren't doing anything to help me achieve that. I got your damn papers, and now just leave so I can get on with my life. Well, that simplified things. I just turned around and left. When I picked up the boys, Carol said to let her know if I needed her to make any more phone calls. I called the utility companies and told them not to shut off services until the end of the month. I guess I felt a little sorry for her. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I never heard from Jenny. The lawyer said everything went smoothly as planned. My new job was great, but I missed the chance to buy a business. Someone else got it along with a quarter of prime land adjacent to it. My boss said they were going to turn it into some kind of horse breeding farm. My job was secure, but my chance to own a home slipped away. 2 weeks later, they started construction next to the feed store. We all tried to guess what was being built, and finally, one of the guys asked the site engineer. It was a veterinary clinic for large animals. I thought it was interesting, but dismissed it as wishful thinking. They erected the entire building in less than 60 days. The new owner was supposed to show up on Saturday. The boys and I were passing by on our way to lunch. I was a little curious. Suddenly, both boys started shouting, "Cindy! Cindy!" Here she is, looking better than ever. Marge was with her. Cindy got her veterinary degree and wanted to breed show horses while managing a large veterinary clinic. While Marge and I talked, she showed the boys the new building. We all went out to lunch together, and Cindy told us that she was also building a new house on the property to be closer to her work. The boys and I were all smiles all the way home that evening. 5 years later, Cindy was breeding beautiful horses. Her clinic was very successful, and I had just opened my 6th feed store. The boys had 2 younger sisters whom they adored. My mother-in-law Marge and Mr. Gilbert would come every weekend. I never did find out his first name. Jenny never did come to visit the boys. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe.